Hi everyone. Reverend Stephanie Wild here, psychic medium and spiritualist minister. I wanted to just pop up here live to talk about um, washing our hands. How is it related to spirituality? And what's been popping into my head, having grown up in a Christian household, I was brought up in definitely Episcopalian, um, Anglican, you might say, um, United Church, the Uniting Church, if that means anything to anyone. Yeah, Presbyterians broke off from others. Anyway, Christian. So I heard the phrase, cleanliness is next to godliness, a lot from my grandmother and then my mother. When I was a kid and I didn't want to take a shower or whatever it was. Wash my hands before dinner, whatever it was. And I never really thought about it. It was just obvious someone wanted me to go wash my ears or something. And then I thought a little bit more about it. What does it mean? Cleanliness is next to godliness? Does that mean that being clean equals being good? Does it mean being clean gets us closer to God or spirit or source as we think of it these days? Or does it mean cleanliness comes second? And if it comes second, then what differentiates it from godliness? And how does this all relate to what we're going through now, where we're being told to wash our hands all the time? And do you even care? Well, hopefully, if you're listening to me. So, anyway, contrary to what many people believe, the phrase cleanliness is next to godliness is not actually from the Christian Bible. It's people just think it is because it is heard in Christian homes. Really, it comes from a very old proverb in Babylonian and Hebrew religious tracts. Now, I couldn't find it there, but I did hear that, I did read that that's where it originally comes from in many different places. So let's just run with that. But it was recorded, written in English in 1605. Francis Bacon wrote in his book, Advancement of Learning, that cleanness of body was ever deemed to proceed from a due reverence to God. So he's saying that first, if we are reverent enough to God, then it follows that we will keep our body clean. One assumes because our body is for God, for service to God, and we should therefore, and we would therefore, if we love God, keep our bodies clean. Yes, the purpose of the body is to serve spirit. It's to learn spiritual lessons in a very physical, visceral way. So yes, our body is to serve God. Okay, so 1605, that was the attitude. Then in 1778, so Francis Bacon was 1605. Now we're at 1778 with John Wesley. So he's the theologian who founded Methodism. Okay, and he wrote a sermon called On Dress. So he was literally giving a sermon about how to dress, how to present yourself to the world. And he says in that sermon, let it be observed that slovenliness is no part of religion. Okay, so if you're religious, if you're properly religious, you will not be slovenly. Let it be observed that slovenliness is no part of religion, that neither this nor any text of scripture condemns neatness of apparel. So he's talking about it in the negative. There's nothing that says you should not be neat. There's nothing that says you should be slovenly. He goes on to say, certainly this, neatness and so forth, certainly this is a duty, not a sin. So he's saying that not being neat and being slovenly is not a part of religion, but that being neat, tidy and clean, is a duty. So it's great, it's good, but it's not a sin. It's not against God. But it's a duty, meaning it's a duty to society. And that in his, later in the book, he says literally, cleanliness is indeed next to godliness. So in that context, it seems that the phrase cleanliness is next to godliness means that it comes second. So godliness is all about not committing sins, and cleanliness is a duty to society. So this is 1778, right? Methodist. And then we move, and 100 years later, after that, into the Victorian era. And in the Victorian era, we find hardline Christian moralists. And the Reform Act was passed in 1832. And so, they were trying to reform society. And the Methodists and the Evangelicals, the evangelical wing of the Church of England, which became Anglican, sort of led this reform for high moral standards. This is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and with it comes political reform and social change. People started, dying, of respiratory illnesses. Not started, but with the Industrial Revolution, it became obvious, right? So you have Charles Dickens writing, you have Charles Darwin writing, you have the railway boom, you have the first telephone and all of that. And Britain is becoming this empire that, we think of it as. So cleanliness is next to godliness was drilled into everyone, right? Higher moral standards, be clean, present well. And the class system is becoming very entrenched. So, if you're working in a factory, it's going to take a lot more work to be clean than if you're at the upper classes. So this is also a way of being able to look down on people. So double-edged sword there. But so this is where we have it, a very Christian moral duty is how it crystallized. So then, as far as I can tell, what happened was that the Christians, thinking, well, it's in the Bible somewhere, well, it must have come from the Bible somewhere, look to the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, cleanliness is talked about as part of following the law, right? Again, we're talking about societal law. But it's linked to the proper worship of God, because if you eat the right things, worship a certain way, keep the commandments, you are considered clean. If you're unable to follow that law, there are washing rituals, and you find this in all kinds of Arab and Jewish religious writings. We find that Muslims are allowed to wash with sand if they can't find water, and so on and so forth. So some Christians now claim, well, the Jews were separating themselves from the Gentiles because the Gentiles didn't follow the same rules of cleanliness. I'm going to shove that aside in a similar way to shoving aside the value of cleanliness in the Victorian times as a way to separate classes. There is no separation between us, and this is simply using societal conventions to create hierarchy, and that is certainly not godly. So then we go to the New Testament. So Proverbs 31:27 describes the godly woman as looking well through the ways of her household. And 1 Corinthians 14:40 says that all things should be done decently and in order. Okay, they're telling women how to keep the household. Yeah, I'm not buying that as part of godliness either. The common theme, the common thread is that cleanliness is second to godliness, and it helps us stay healthy, and it's not a bad thing. Because, I do think there's a big difference between purity, when at describing the quality of an individual, and cleanliness as a system of societal interactions. Cleanliness has a social dimension. And then godliness is all about conforming to the wishes of God. But as we've just discovered, there's nothing in religion that says being dirty is a sin, a spiritual sin. So we're talking about a duty to society. So now, why should we do it, and should we do it? And is it related to spirituality at all? Well, so now I'm talking as Reverend Stephanie Wild. I am of the opinion that maintaining cleanliness is essential because it is a reflection of inner cleanliness, mind, emotion, and then body. And especially in a time like now, we have a social contract to be clean, to wash our hands at the most basic. Because when we make this act, we are expressing our respect for others' lives, for others' health, for others' comfort, for others' serenity. So washing our hands as a symbol of cleanliness, as the very act of cleanliness and a symbol, is an act of love, an act of respect that is coming from alignment with Source. Because when we do unto others as we would do unto ourselves, when we follow the golden rule, we are in alignment. We are living love. So this is why I would say at this point in time, cleanliness is godliness. I would think that cleanliness indeed is a sin at this time, because we are thinking of others as not separate from ourselves. In fact, we are not separate. We only think we are. So at this time, we're going to wash our hands because we are not separate. And interestingly, we're going to practice social distancing because we are all in this together. We're going to distance our bodies from one another for a time because, in fact, there is no separation of spirit. If we separate our bodies for a time, we come closer in spirit, in love. So what I would just say to you is that as you're working from home or choosing to stay at home, as you're separating your bodies, as we separate our bodies from one another, we can use this time to cultivate love for our fellow humans. We can go within. Instead of being angry and fearful, we can use it as a time to cultivate love. Because as we separate from one another, we are coming closer in love to one another. So that's it. Wash your hands, everyone. And much love to you.